Welcome to the Simsbury View. I'm Dominique Avery, sitting in for Althea Graney. Today we're focusing on the role of the bicycle in Simsbury. First we were named a bronze, then a silver bike-friendly community. Now there's lots of talk about creating a connection for the East Coast Greenway from Route 10 to Terriffill. If you're not a bike person, what I've just said may make your head spin. Well, I have two people here who are going to try and clarify everything. Tom Roy, welcome.
Thank you.
Tom Roy is our Public Works Director and quite a bike enthusiast yourself. I saw you at the triathlon, and I think you did quite well. And Bruce Donald, you're going to see on screen, he has so many bike organization titles that it can make your head spin. So we're going to put it on the screen under your name.
Oh, fine.
So I'm going to ask our guests to pretend that they are talking to someone who has just returned to Simsbury from Mars and know nothing from East Coast Greenways or silver bike-friendly communities. So Tom, how did all this bike enthusiasm start in Simsbury? I understand you were a little bit of the process in the beginning.
Well, I think I was a little bit of a process in I think the most recent push. If you really look back, we were one of the first communities in Connecticut to have a multi-use trail, a bike path as it is, in the Iron Horse section of town. A few years back, there was a push, kind of led by Mary Glassman and Steve Mitchell, to become bicycle friendly and to receive the designation from the American League of Bicyclists. And that was right as I was starting to work here in town, and being a bike person myself, it was a nice fit. And that's where we really started to just read up on what more advanced communities are doing in terms of supporting bicycles, making it safer for bicyclists on our roadway, and what small things we could do to start to improve our culture and our transportation system to make it more friendly for bicycles.
I think you're being modest, because I did hear in the very beginning, I know there were people before you like Rich Sawitsky who did a lot of big things, and Mary Glassman jumped on board, but a lot of people have said if you were not a big bicycle supporter, it wouldn't have happened. So in any case. Okay, Bruce, you are involved in all these organizations that have something to do with the East Coast Greenway. Can we start with the Connecticut Committee for the East Coast Greenway? Can we start first with what is the East Coast Greenway?
Okay, well, around the same time when this whole Rails to Trails concept popped up, which was the early 90s, a set of people got together in Boston and Maine, in fact, and said to themselves, well, why can't we have an off-road bicycle route on the whole of the East Coast? So that would be from Calais, Maine to Key West, Florida. Something over 2,900 miles. It's about 32% built now, which is quite amazing when you think about it. And there's going to be some pieces that'll be very, very difficult to build. But the idea is a great one, which is connecting communities. And in our case, in Connecticut, it would literally be some of the major communities in Connecticut, including the current corridor right now for the Farmington Canal Heritage Trail, which is New Haven to Northampton, Massachusetts. That's the spine trail in the center of the state, right? And then here's Hartford. So we want to connect Hartford to that. And again, that's part and parcel with what the East Coast Greenway wants to do as a national organization.
So it's sort of a spine down the East Coast, or a
yeah.
trail.
Well, that's exactly what it's designed to be, right. And then connectivity off it for a variety of different trails. There's a whole bunch of trails in Connecticut that want to attach to it. There's a big push to try to do a Merritt Parkway trail. So that would be the connector, essentially, from New Haven, around New Haven area, to New York, which currently really doesn't exist right now. There's bits and pieces of trail down around Route 1. And then to the east, you go east from Hartford, and many of those trails are built now. So, Manchester, and then you've got the Charter Oak Greenway, you've got a variety of greenways going out all the way to the Airline Trail, and then obviously that next connection is Providence. So that whole issue of connectivity is huge, and Simsbury happens to be right in the middle of it.
Okay, so you mentioned the Farmington Canal Heritage Trail and the Farmington River Trail.
Yes.
Are those part of the East Coast Greenway? Are those different names for different portions of it?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because around here for many, many years, for 15 years really, we had the Farmington Valley Greenway, which I no longer want anybody to use.
The name.
The name, yes. No, I want you to use the trail. Yeah, use the trail. But the name is confusing because the Farmington Canal Heritage Trail runs 80 miles from Long Wharf in New Haven through Yale, Hamden, Cheshire, Southington, Plainville, which we're working on right now, Farmington, Avon, Simsbury.
So that's along the old canal route.
Correct.
That was a canal first and then became a train.
And actually,
railroad.
more importantly, it's actually really along the railroad route, much of which was built along the towpath for the canal. And obviously there's a lot of places where they couldn't do that, so it moves around. So it's essentially on the railroad right-of-way, which was mostly dropped in the 80s, and the state DOT bought it, so it was open. So hence Rails to Trails.
And I think, interestingly enough, if you look in a lot of places, if you're walking or bicycling on that path, you can actually see where the old canal is. You can see the old canal bed.
Yep.
And it really kind of ties a little bit into, this recreation also with the history of the area.
So in Avon, when you drive down Route 10 there...
That's a piece of the canal.
That's a piece of... Okay.
Absolutely, certainly is. And in fact, there's some preserved locks. There's actually a lock keeper's house in Hamden, if you get a chance to go down the Farmington Canal Heritage Trail there. So that's the East Coast Greenway. That's the spine trail. It goes up to Route 315 essentially in Simsbury, and then goes east toward Hartford. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But the river trail is really just considered to be a loop trail. So if you go on the loop, so if you went clockwise, say, go through Unionville, Burlington, Collinsville, there's a little bit of on-road in Simsbury, come back into Simsbury, then go back down to the center of Farmington. It's a little over 28 miles. It's one of the very, very few long loop trails in the United States.
Okay, the penny just dropped. Farmington River Trail. I don't know why. I just got confused between Farmington Canal and Farmington
So it really
River.
is a different it's a different
totally
trail.
different.
And it is not
and
part
it's
of
a
the
loop.
East Coast Greenway.
Okay, not part of the...
Yes.
Okay, that makes it very clear for the first time in years.
Okay.
I actually understand
But
that.
I think that's a good example of how other trails can hook into the spine.
Yeah,
that
that's what I'm
Bruce was
talking about, this connectivity thing. Exactly right. Yeah.
So, so people, now we had this event that we aired on SCTV, this Tariffville meeting about attaching the existing trail in Simsbury to Tariffville and then Hartford and beyond. So why is that important? And I have heard, or at least from Steve Mitchell has said that maybe the DOT wants to connect it not going through Simsbury, and that would be terrible for us because it's an economic driver. So let's go back a step. So why are we trying to connect it, and how is that going to work?
I'm going to let this guy talk about the nuts and bolts. Let me start very quickly with the broad brush, which is that, again, this connecting big cities to small towns, to farmland, to bigger towns, to cities again, right? This is this connectivity issue. So everyone's desperate to connect to Hartford, and Hartford's desperate to connect out here. So that's the broad brush issue. So,
well, and I think what we have is basically three separate opportunities with that trail as it relates to Tariffville. The first thing that we're looking to do is to connect our existing multi-use path from that area along 315 to Curtis Park. Wouldn't it be great on a Saturday during soccer season if some of the kids and families could ride their bikes from their nearby neighborhood up or down the trail over to 315, cross over, play their soccer game at Curtis Park? You're talking about small trips, 2 or 3 miles. There's no reason that can't be done on a bicycle. The second part of this is connecting up to Bloomfield. Bloomfield has been making an effort to connect their trail, and without a great deal of distance, there's the potential to connect Bloomfield up to Tariffville Center. It opens up opportunities for people in Tariffville who may want to commute into Hartford. Right now, that's a very dangerous corridor to do on a bicycle. Even for the most avid cyclists, it's not a great place.
Somebody killed there not too long
Somebody
ago.
was killed over on the Bloomfield side just 2 years ago. And these are the places where you say, why not make it a little bit safer? And it opens up some opportunities for Tariffville because people can then come in. There's restaurants, there's shops, there's opportunities there. And if those two pieces come together and there's a will of the community, you have the ability to connect those two pieces up, which then links up to Hartford in the long run. There's a lot of environmental issues. There's a lot of things that we would have to go very carefully as we look into this. And there's been no promise that this is going to happen, but this is certainly the direction that we're looking, making sure that we explore carefully, making sure that whatever we do in terms of putting this trail in, that it's respectful of the environment. Ultimately, I think, and others have agreed, that if we bring people down and they can see the river in Terriffill, you see the treasure that you have, it actually is going to allow for some better environmental stewardship in the long run.
So I actually interviewed someone, a teacher who lives in Terriffill, who is a bike enthusiast as well, and he tried to go home on his lunch hour once on the existing roads, and he said he can't do it. It's just so dangerous to drive from Simsbury to Terriffill on that hill, and it's just, so the trail would not go up the road hill, it would go another direction.
There are a couple different preliminary alignments that have been thrown out. Some are closer to the river, some are closer to the roadway, some require an elevated platform similar if you've ever been to Collinsville, where they essentially build a wooden platform over some of the more environmentally sensitive areas. Everything's on the table, and nothing's going to be done that's not well thought out and properly engineered. The beautiful thing at this point, after doing this for 25 years, we've really gotten to a point in designing and building trails to know what works best for both the trail users and the environment.
Yep. And by the time designs go through permitting, inland wetlands, Army Corps, you name it, you've got a design that's a trustworthy design and environmentally friendly, and But again, Eileen Fielding from the Farmington River Watershed Association got up at that meeting and said something very interesting. She said, you have to have access to these things, and I thought that was fantastic because it's true. And I mean, how often does anyone walk down into Terriffill Gorge unless you kind of have to?
Unless you go to the
unless
white
you
water.
go to the kayaking thing, which is actually pretty fun.
Right.
But so again, it's an access thing.
Right.
And I would also add something on that. Bloomfield is very active, and in fact, Bloomfield has asked to be part of our organization, which is interesting. But they've got 2.2 miles essentially designed of that trail, and it follows the old Griffin line, and would essentially back up to within the range of where Simsbury would be building. That's the piece they want to build first.
Yep.
And they're being very aggressive about it. I mean, I'm hearing stuff that they may want to go to bid later this year with that. So I don't know how much you've heard about that, but
yeah, we want to basically track. The other big piece in this is right now there's a lot of potential for state grants and federal grants to help fund this.
I was just about to ask, where's the money come from? Go ahead.
That's going to definitely be a big part of this, and the one thing that we want to do is make sure that we keep our toe in the water, so to speak, to make sure that if grant monies become available, that we'd be ready to react to them. Not, again, putting the project ahead of where it needs to be, but certainly be ready to accept that money either for design or for construction or a combination thereof.
And that's the two different pieces. Is you have to find money for design, and you have to get a trail alignment. Once you get that, you can go to what's called 20 or 30% design, and then you're ready to get the big money. And the big bucks are, of course, what actually builds it. Multi-use trail is averaging about $1 million a mile right now, roughly.
Yep.
If there's more engineering, substantially more. If you're building a big bridge, a lot more. And we're hopefully not doing that. But the reason why I bring that up is that the state, for the first time, DOT really pushed forward with the governor just recently this new transportation budget bill. And it provides for $10 million over the next 2 years, which is actually not going through DOT, it's going through DEEP. And one of the other committees that I'm the chairman of is the Connecticut Greenways Council. That Connecticut Greenways Council will in fact be the advocacy group that will put in a list the bike trails that are going to get that $5 million a year. And so that's another thing. That's very recent. That's brand new.
And I know, I'm sure there's somebody out there watching right now who's saying, $1 million a mile, Simsbury can't afford that. But that's why these grants, which are supported both at the state level and federally, are so important. And the reason that they've supplied that grant money is they see what it can do for a community in terms of economic driver, health benefits. I mean, you start looking at getting people out, young, old. You go out to the trail on a Saturday, and the difference in the types of people you see, and all getting good, healthy activity. And there's also, I think, in Iron Horse Boulevard section is probably the best place to see this. There's a sense of community there.
Right. Families. You always see families.
In the wintertime, people drive from their neighborhoods down to Iron Horse Boulevard because that's the place to walk. And you see your friends, you see your neighbors.
Yep.
And I think that's really the beauty of what we have here in Simsbury in terms of our trail and how it reacts with our community.
I call it the new town square.
Right. It's interesting. I ran into a West Hartford rabbi not too long ago, and when he heard that I was from Simsbury, he said, "Oh my God, my family and I go there every weekend. We bike a piece of the trail, and we've made it all the way to Southwick, and then now we're working towards doing the whole thing, and we absolutely love it." Now he comes from West Hartford, and then they stop and have lunch, and well,
the economic development part of this is very real.
Right.
We get calls. The Trails Council gets calls from New Jersey, New York, Maryland. I got a call from a family coming in from France. Because the guy was doing something at the UConn Medical Center. The family wanted something to do over a week, so they're going to ride the whole trail system. It is, and by the way, when it's all completely finished, and it's 75% done, Plainville is the last real major gap, but there's a gap in Cheshire as well, and a small gap in New Haven. When that's done, this is going to be a major draw. I mean, not just for Connecticut, but for the region.
Right. It's true. And the bike, I mean, then we have Simsbury Free Bike. You can talk about that and how that started.
Well, Simsbury Free Bike is funny because it's somewhat evolved. When I started working for the town, we had a bunch of bicycles stored up at our public works facility. Bicycles that had been collected by the police that had never been recovered. It's amazing that somebody would lose a bike, or a bike that maybe had been stolen and it never found its rightful owner. They'd been up there for years, and between that and just a desire to try and get bikes out there, we originally modeled the program after a number of successful programs across the country that did things on a very small scale. We were never interested in doing something like New York City has the bike rental program. You need credit cards and kiosks, and it's $1 million program. And we originally were going to do it as part of the town and basically put the bikes out with a sign that says, "Use me for the day and bring me back." Our insurance carrier was not such a big fan of that. So fortunately, we were able to find a nonprofit and a bunch of really dedicated people that were willing to take it over from us. We handed over the bikes that we had originally prepared, helped them with that first year, and now they're up and running and completely self-sufficient. I think they have bikes basically from Farmington up into Southwick, I think.
I think they have 80 bikes now.
Yeah, they have in at least 6 different communities.
6 or 7 towns, yeah.
And they've got the high school kids involved.
And now they're doing the art bikes.
The art bikes, right.
Which is a far cry from my guys spray painting them blue, but and it's really been great, and it's built its own momentum, and I smile every time I see them go by.
So now, not everybody in Simsbury is a bike enthusiast. There are some people who complain about too many bikes on the roads and roads being shut down for bike events or other kinds of events. And I know that on the, you pointed out to me that the trails are both are for pedestrians and for bikers, and there's a little bit of a conflict sometimes there. How are you handling the people who aren't so happy with the bikes on the roads?
Well, I think you hit two really important issues there. The first is the bicycles on the road, and the complaint that's often comes to the town and comes to our police department is that the bicycles aren't necessarily obeying the traffic laws, or they're blocking traffic, or they're going too fast, there's too many. And it's a two-way street, in that the cars have to accept the fact that the bikes have a place on the roadway, and the bicyclists have to show appropriate courtesy and follow the same laws that a car does. A stop sign is a stop sign for a bike just as much as it is for a car. One of the things the bike advocacy group here in town has been doing is trying to push that message out, trying to make sure that as bicyclists, good courtesy goes a long way. And I think that the same thing is, especially now with the new 3-foot law that's been in effect for a couple years, and the vulnerable users law that just passed, there's more incentive for motorists to do what's right, which is to give the cyclist a little bit of time.
Yep.
The way I've heard it that explains it the best is, a car comes up behind two cyclists riding side by side, and immediately there's a level of frustration when you have to maybe slow down and wait for a car on the other way to pass. But at the same time, if a car was parked on the same side of the road, there doesn't seem to be that same reaction of frustration. And I think that's going to be just a matter of time and people starting to accept it. For every bicycle on the road, that's one less car.
Right.
And then when it comes to using our trail, again, it comes down to courtesy. We've advocated, and in some ways it's a great problem to have, is we have areas that are congested, and we've put up signs that say congested area. We've now put up on Iron Horse Boulevard dedicated bike lanes, so those through cyclists, those faster bicycles, have a place to go and be away from the pedestrians. That's not saying that every bike belongs out there. If you're there with your kids on their training wheels, you certainly belong on the path. That's there for that purpose.
Yep. And I would echo a couple of things quickly. This whole issue of trail etiquette is in fact something of a blessing, because it will. We're trying hard to build a trail system for the people that aren't on bikes. We're building the trail system for families with kids, for older folks that want to get out and exercise. The usual, what I call the usual suspects, the guys that are huffing up and down the hills every day, they're out on the roads. The trail's too slow for them. Mm-hmm. So it kind of self-polices itself to a certain extent. But what we get is, we get a lot of calls from either an angry cyclist or an angry pedestrian, right? It's one or the other always. And the one side of this thing is they're not giving us enough warning to get over. This would be the pedestrian, and you have to yell, on your left, I'm passing you, or use a bike bell. We give away thousands of bike bells a year for just this purpose, free to anybody who wants them. And the other side of the equation is that we get calls about pedestrians who will line across the whole trail and walk next to each other and chat, right. Which drives cyclists insane. So it's a two-way street. Right. It's an education issue. Right.
It is an education issue. And if you have any experience in European cities, they have bikeways. Yep. Which are for bikes.
But see, they've got a generation's experience.
They do.
We don't.
But I go there, and I'm strolling along the bike path, and the bell comes behind me,
Absolutely.
And the bicyclist is furious.
And you got to know in your mind what to do.
Right.
You got to get right over to the right.
But I'm not used to it, so eventually people will get used to
Yep.
it. And I don't think we're ever going to get to the point where everybody's like, I was in Berlin last November, and during rush hour, I mean, everybody was on their bikes.
Yep.
It was amazing.
That's a multimodal infrastructure issue, and that's generational. Right. That, I mean, if we ever get there in America, and people would argue that car culture would dictate that we won't, you're talking, we're probably all dead by then.
Right. But when you were talking about speed and on the regular roads, it occurred to me that in a town like Simsbury, in a rural town like Simsbury, it's not a bad thing if the motorists have to go slower.
It's not a bad thing at all. I think it's a combination. Just the same way you have bad drivers once in a while, you have a bad cyclist. And I think it's all a matter of everybody just truly sharing the road. I can tell you, when you start talking about intermodal transportation, before coming to Simsbury, I worked in Hartford. And that's where I really started commuting on my bicycle, because it took the same amount of time to drive in at 10 miles an hour through traffic on 84 as it did to ride my bike in. And that's really what sold me, that this is a very viable form of transportation.
Yep. Yeah.
Well, I can see that there are people in Simsbury who would like a Tarryville route rather than having to ride across 44, which is a horrible way of biking to work.
You're jogging my memory, and I wanted to mention this. We're a glacial area, so the Ice Age came through, wiped everything up and down, north-south. So north-south routes are easy. And so the Farmington Canal Heritage Trail is a case in point. It was relatively easy to build. The railroad right-of-way was there. It's fairly flat. Getting over these ridges, this way,
right.
Very hard.
Yeah.
And because of the way that they were built, they were blasted, a lot of them. They're not very wide. So you've got no shoulder for bikes. Mm-hmm. And a couple of those roads are death traps. I mean, they really are. They're not fun. I mean, even guys that ride on the road all the time are not pleased with that.
Yeah, well, 44 is, and I used to commute.
Well, 44 is just dangerous.
It's dangerous, yeah. And I used to commute, and I used to look at those bike riders commuting to work and thinking, they're nuts. Right.
Yeah, there's not many places I feel unsafe on the road, and that's one I won't do that one.
Yeah. Signage. There's all kinds of new signage, I've noticed. And you're largely responsible for that. What kind of signs are there on the roads and for bike riders and pedestrians?
It's funny because there's we've done a lot with our signage, and we're actually going to be doing a lot more as we come into fall. The first thing that we did in terms of bicycling in Simsbury was we put down the Sharrows. That's the bicycle logo with the two little chevrons that sits right on the roadway itself. And that's an advisory symbol. It simply means that as a driver in a car, you should be aware that there are going to be a number of cyclists on the roadway, and this is the approximate area on the roadway that they're going to be. And for a cyclist, it reminds you this is where you should be. Not in the center of the road, but over towards the side. And towards the side being a strong word.
So exactly. A mixed use traffic lane.
Right.
Yep. It's just that. It's shared. We also, like I said, on Iron Horse, we have dedicated bike lanes. The difference between that and a shared route is there's an actual line. It means that that is only for bicycles. And then we also did bike route signage where we, just again, to highlight the fact that you're going to see bicycles in that area. And as I said, coming into this fall, we're looking to improve our bicycle route signage, some of the green signs you see around. So it's going to help the cyclist to stay on that bicycle route. Right now, if you don't know the area and you come to some of these intersections, you don't know
which way to go.
Exactly.
Right. So you have green signs and brown signs.
We have green signs. We have the brown signs, which are directional as to where the trails are. We put up some new signs on the trail recently, and we actually have modeled those after what Portland, Oregon has done, where it's a bicycle sign telling you where the local amenities are. Food, drink, the library, town hall, the police department. Things that somebody using the trail hopefully will say, this is a reason for me to get off the trail, take my wallet out, and spend some money in Simsbury. And the interesting thing is they have both distance and time, because they found that by giving a cyclist an indication of it's 10 minutes away is more likely to get them to go in that direction.
Interesting. So we have 1 minute left. Do you need volunteers?
We always need volunteers.
Okay, so what should people do?
We are, the Farmington Valley Trails Council is a 501c3 not-for-profit, and we are exclusively volunteer. So if you went to our website, which is FV, as in Farmington Valley, Greenway.org, you can sign up and join us. And we'd love to have you as a member as well. Our membership is about a little under 1,000 right now, and which makes us one of the largest ones in New England. And we do a lot with that money. So, we help the towns a great deal with maintenance. We have an adopt-a-trail program. A lot of things that we do that help we have 9 towns in our organization right now. So not just Simsbury, we should say.
Right. Well, this is only being seen in Simsbury. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So you can say we're your favorite town.
Yeah. I can say that. Yeah.
So thank you guys. This has been interesting. I hope it's been edifying for our viewers. I hope we've talked to people who've just come from Mars and made it clear. So our time is up. Thanks to everyone here at SCTV for getting the show on the air, our able camera people, and thanks especially to my guests, Bruce, Donald, and Tom Roy for their help. And finally, thank you for joining us. If you missed any portion of the show, you can always find the air schedule to watch it on TV, or you can watch it directly on our website at simsburytv.org. I'm Dominique Avery, sitting in for Althea Graney.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.